This is Gwen Mayer, the archivist at the Hudson Library and Historical Society. As some of you may know, and hopefully you're all here for, we are hosting, and we are very proud to host Maria Hinojosa tonight, and she is speaking in conjunction with Sarah Smarsh. Sarah has been to Hudson, and we love Sarah here, but let me tell you a little bit about Maria in case you don't know her. She is an Emmy award-winning executive producer of a Latina USA show on NPR. She has won numerous awards, the John Chancellor Award for Excellence in Journalism, the Robert F. Kennedy Award, and the Edwin R. Murrow Award. Maria cannot be underestimated in any shape or form. She is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, and she is the host of NPR's Latino USA. Sarah has written also a book, and her book is called Heartland, A Memory of Working Hard and Being Broke in the Richest Country on Earth. Let me tell you, I read Sarah's book and fell in love with her from the moment I finished it. And Maria's book is Once I Was You, A Memory of Love and Hate in a Torn USA. So tonight we're going to have Sarah, and she's going to be in conversation with Maria. Before we get to that, I want to tell you tomorrow's program is Kyle Mills. He will speak about his novel and best-selling thriller, Total Power. And on Thursday, we have expert beauty artist Rico Campo, whose book, I Am Beauty, he will be speaking. All of these books, all of these authors will provide their books to the Learned Owl, and you'll be able to purchase those books at the Learned Owl. So please patronize our favorite bookstore, the Learned Owl, and go there and seek out their books, both on their website and in person if you'd like to. So you don't want to hear me anymore, so I'm going to allow Sarah to begin this wonderful evening of her conversation with Maria. So take it away, Sarah.
Hey, thanks, Gwen, and thanks to the Hudson Library for hosting this event. We are here once again to celebrate not just the publication of, but the official publication day of. Today it drops, Once I Was You, A Memoir of Love and Hate in a Torn America by Maria Hinojosa, who joins us not exactly in the flesh, but in the virtual flesh. I've been so excited to chat with her this evening. I'm a longtime fan of your work, Maria, a longtime listener of Latino USA. I've been learning from you for years, and your book, which I had the good fortune to read earlier this summer, is not surprisingly amazing. You know, this book, for those of you who are just kind of joining the conversation around it, is about many of the themes of Maria's life's work, including immigration. So I wanted to start at the top of our conversation by just acknowledging a critical and horrifying news story that broke this week, yesterday in fact, where we learned by way of a female nurse about accusations of forced and unnecessary sterilizations in ICE detention centers. So later, Maria, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about the issues inherent to your work. But first, I want to talk to you about the book itself and this craft that you must have given a great deal of time to come up with such a beautiful piece of art that you wrote. So those who know your work would know that in many forms across the genre of broadcasting and in other forms even, you're often about correcting prevailing narratives, specifically prevailing false narratives written by those in power who tend to be white and male. And you know, your work doesn't do that like in a reactive sense, being defined by those falsehoods, but rather just by asserting the truth unapologetically. I'm wondering, did you always intend to write a book like this that in so many ways sort of distills the themes not only of your work but of your lived experience?
Well, to be honest with you, Sarah, and thank you to Hudson, and thank you, Sarah, for your work. I mean, your work with Heartland, and congratulations on your upcoming book. Oh my God, Dolly Parton, just saying. So you're an inspiration, and thank you for your work. And it's great to be with you virtually. I wish I was there because I happen to love Ohio very deeply as a state, just saying, like the most important state of all. Just saying, in terms of where we are with the election, the most important. So, when I didn't intend to write a book, Sarah, writing a book is really hard. It takes a tremendous amount of effort. It's very scary. You know, you've got tons of editors reading your work, you know, oh my God, you have to disconnect from everyone and everything in order to do this. You have to have extraordinary, so I didn't want to write a book. To be honest with you, I wasn't planning. What ended up happening is that it was 2016 and I ended up going on MSNBC on primetime and kind of having a moment, what turned into a viral moment where I was correcting Steve Cortez, who is a Trump supporter on MSNBC, and he had used the term illegal immigrants. He had said something about, well, those illegals something, and I said, sir, there is no such thing as an illegal human being. There is no such thing as illegal being a noun. A person is not illegal, an action is. And that moment went viral. And someone very close to me said, well, you need to write that book. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll write the little small book, you know, that little pocket book that you see at the airport back when we were in airports. And, you know, like Chimamanda's We Are All Feminists, you know, like and I was like, I can write that book, that short little thing. You know, and then it turns out that that's not a book that actually necessarily your agent thinks is a good book to try to put out there. Anyway, long story short, you know, there was like, well, write your own story. And then it was, and then understand that it's a much bigger story. And really, Sarah, I have to be honest with you, when I read Heartland, I was like, oh my God, this is the kind of work, this impactful work where you're reading not only your life and your memories. I mean, there are sections of your book that I can remember, the descriptions of just kind of like the geography of the place, your home, what it looked like, you know, your feelings of feeling very alone, this, you know, deep personal critique that you were living with because you were where you were from. And so I actually understood. I said, if I can do something similar where I'm not only telling my personal story, but like Sarah did, she was revealing kind of structural inequality in the heartland, then this can be an important book. And that's when it was like, okay, so now you not only have to do this stuff about writing about your own personal life, which is always fun, interesting, hard, but then it was like, now you got to go and do the research and figure out what parts of the immigration story and immigration policy are we going to tell. Honestly, like in your book, it's like spinach. You have to read this. You have to eat it. You have to. But the way you write, the way I write it, it's like spinach, but the best kind of spinach. Like, you know, when you're eating Italian food and it's like with garlic and olive oil and lemon. So it's delicious tasting spinach, but it's going to change the way you think about spinach. And this book is going to change the way you think about not just my story, that's not the most important, but rather the arc of immigration policy and civil rights and abuses and human rights in our country.
Yeah, and you even get into, I mean, like U.S.-Mexico relations. I mean, there's a great deal of history in addition to cultural critique and memoir woven in to your narrative. And gosh, I have to say sincerely, it's incredible to hear you say that my work had something to do with yours, and you're so generous. But I want to ask you about that. You know, you just described the process and the structure that you chose and the reasons why you chose it. I'd love to know, I actually plan on chatting about this a little bit later in the conversation, but I'm going to ask you now, you know, you, for most of your, the greater bulk of your energy as a journalist for 30 years, and in many ways a pioneering journalist, as sometimes the only Latina in a newsroom at NPR, CNN, and elsewhere. You were working in a reporter's capacity and Of course, there is within that industry, within our industry, this idea about objectivity that has been upheld as a hard and fast virtue. Definitions of that objectivity or the possibility of attaining it differ. But I'm curious whether, to me, your voice in Once I Was You is, it's not going to be any surprise to those who have been listening to and following your work for a long time, because it is, you, regardless of who you're talking about, whether it's yourself or others, you are always warm, big-hearted, and yet also fierce and firm and straight shooting. And that's all there. But there is this added dimension of extreme vulnerability in revelations about your own life, not just yourself, but people you love deeply and must feel very protective of. I'm just wondering, was it easy for you? I'm sure it wasn't easy, but let me rephrase that. Was it, how was that process of accessing that sort of additional heart chamber, I guess, for the writing of a book by a consummate journalist?
I just had to go there. I realized the truth is I didn't have a lot of time. So I had to open that up really clearly. Let me tell you a little bit about how the book, because there's a lot of suffering that happens when you write a book. I have been writing, and when I finally get my editor, Michelle Herrera Mulligan, who helps me to, she's really envisioning this and she's helping me to understand. And it was Michelle who basically said, okay, you need to write an outline now. Your writing is great, but you need an outline. And I was like, what? What? I'm a writer. Yeah. So once I sat down to work on creating that outline, then I felt free enough in the writing that I had to do every day, because I had assignments every day. I knew what I had to write. And I did. I unlocked that chamber and I just said, go there. And I wasn't thinking so much about how I was writing. I really tried to quiet that voice that writers suffer with all the time, which is, oh my God, I'm writing and this is terrible. This is terrible writing. Ugh. And, instead just kind of being with the emotions and letting the emotions pour out, and then realizing that I'd have to go back and fix it, smooth it, clean it up. And I felt like, you're right, Sarah. Thank you for your question, because you did capture it. Like part of, one of the things that I talk about, it was a sad moment in my career when my editor actually at NPR said to me, oh, come on, Maria, we know about your agenda as a journalist. And I was like, what are you talking about, my agenda? Like I had been at NPR as a correspondent maybe for, 2, maybe 3 years. So still early on in my career. And to have a journalist say that you have an agenda, that's the biggest insult. So when he said this, I was like, what are you talking about? I said, oh, your Latino agenda. And I was like, I don't even know how that happens, how you would have that perspective about me. And so I chose to go deep into that side of the more intimate side of myself, because if I have an agenda, it's been about heart, actually. Because I went home and I thought about that. I mean, obviously, I think I cried to my husband, Herman, and then I really thought about it, and I was like, do I have an agenda? Do I, I of course I care about Latino stories, but they're not the only stories that I'm doing. I'm doing politics. I love that. I love this. And I was like, okay, well, if I have an agenda, it's to touch people with my reporting. And so maybe in some ways this person liberated me in the sense that I was able to understand, yeah, no, I have this agenda. And so I went there in the book with heart. And I don't know how you do that. It's like I can't really explain as a writer how you do that, except that you well, you have to do some spiritual work. Actually, you have to try to do some spiritual work that allows you to be in a place that is so non-judgmental with yourself, that you can do this. And that's what you need as a journalist. If you're going to do this, you have to be non-judgmental. You have to be just like, you have an editor who's going to read this, so it's going to be okay. You're not going to put anything out there that is horrible or too revealing. That's why you have an editor, and so now you just need to let it flow. That's what I tried to do.
Yeah. You mentioned briefly politics in your answer as a realm that you have covered, and of course intersects with also sorts of aspects of our culture that you've reported on and revealed. This year, earlier this month, they announced the moderators for the presidential debates, and there isn't a single Latinx moderator among them. So I'm curious, that at the very least racist feedback that you received in that newsroom from the guy who perhaps liberated you unwittingly. To what extent, how have you seen things shift for the better or for the worse in terms of just, I think a lot of people joining us this evening, they're probably, well, no doubt they're media consumers, and their ability to understand the filters through which information is being poured into their digital streams is important for media literacy, for understanding truth from fiction. To what extent is racism and sexism still prevalent in the industry where you have been working for 30 years?
I mean, you said it, Sarah. I didn't bring it up. You brought it up. There are no Latino or Latina moderators in the presidential debate in the year 2020. How is that possible? How is that possible when Latinos and Latinas are one of the central, attacks against Latinos and Latinas in the sense of building a wall and keeping us out and portraying us as some kind of a threat, a completely false narrative. How is it possible that we are the center of the conversation and yet we're not there? This is very disheartening, to be very honest with you. I struggle with this every day because I feel like we are being made invisible as we speak. So how is that happening, right? Because here I am with you, at the Hudson Library. We're doing this. I published this book, with a major but there is still a feeling like we're not there. So that is real. And it is very disheartening. Look, I mean, do I really want to be there on a panel asking questions to the President, Trump and Biden? I mean, is that like the be all end all in my career? No. But the thing is that it's not about me. It's about having a Latino or Latina voice that understands this perspective. And it is the basics of journalism. I think that is what is so hard, is that, Sarah, it's like when you're a journalist, it's like you're a journalist through and through. And so these critiques that we get of, oh, well, you're biased. Oh, well, you're not objective. Oh, you only want to do a particular kind of story. I mean, as a journalist, those are insults, right? Because we're not. I take my ethics super seriously. And so this notion that we are so unable to be fair is completely wrong. And I just want to say something actually to all of the people who are watching us in Ohio, in the larger part of the state. We need you as voters. So I do hope that you're watching this. Of course, we want you to buy the book. We want you to read it and share it with your friends and feel identified. And share these stories, which to me, these are American stories. They're not a Latina story or an immigrant story. It's an American story. I'm from Chicago. I'm from the Midwest. I'm just like you. just like you. Good title. I just hope that you realize how much power you have by being voters, and that this is where good allyship kind of comes. Today on WNYC, which is the largest public radio station in the country, very influential. And, you know, as journalists, we're super competitive. We have good, solid ethics, but we're also deeply competitive. Like, those are things about journalists that we're just kind of born with. And Brian Lehrer, my fellow journalist, said to me, you know what, Maria? We have a request in to interview Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but we know they haven't given you the interview yet. And he said, and so I'm just saying publicly right now, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, give Maria Hinojosa and Latino USA the interview first. And I was like, wow. That's what allyship looks like. That's when a fellow journalist says, what's happening in your community, how your perspective, how you're understanding this moment is essential for us to understand as a country. It's not about me. And that's why I love that you and I, Sarah, are in this conversation. It's not about me, it's about all of us. Because if these horrors are happening in our country today while we are here, what does it say about us? Not about the immigrants, the refugees, the women who have been forcibly sterilized. We are feeling it with our blood, with our bodies, we're feeling it. It's how do the rest of us manage to live in this situation? And that's why not being asked to be on a presidential debate is so disheartening. Yes, we're passionate. Don't be afraid of passion. It's okay.
You know, the forced sterilization story that you just mentioned, which broke this week, you tweeted, you know, there are those of us who have been covering such stories for and aware of that those sorts of horrors for a very long time, and there seems to now be, I suppose, some shift in terms of who is willing to pay attention, who's willing to look at a story. Your story about Brian Lehrer suggests that there is greater awareness of racial privilege within the ranks of the media class. I would love to know, you know, your book, Once I Was You, is told with such, you know, as I said, fierceness and direct honesty, but also, you know, a real open-heartedness to allow the seeming enemy to change, I suppose, is a way to say it. And as far as whiteness and the blinders of privilege that entails, I'm curious if to your mind, the issue in an overwhelmingly white media industry is that they don't see the stories that you can see because of your lived experience and identity, or is it that they saw it and didn't care for a very long time, and to some extent that might still be true?
I think it's a couple of those things. You know, one of the things that we're realizing now, it's really horrible, but I do think we have to kind of acknowledge is that, you know, the hatred towards immigrants really is based on anti-Black hatred and anti-Indigenous hatred. And so we have to kind of understand that in that continuum, right? And there's part of what I wanted to do with the book was to deconstruct a narrative that, I mean, I was raised in the Midwest, right? So the Statue of Liberty, now I'm a stone's throw from the Statue of Liberty. Well, you know, about 5 miles. But we were taught that there was a narrative around being open to immigrants. So then why does this feel so confusing? Why does this feel so confusing? It's the same kind of contradiction that you bring up in the heartland, which is the heartland is always called upon as like the heartland of the United States. You know, such an important part of our country. you know, I mean, I was growing up in the Midwest and I knew what the heartland was. And I was like, well, that's not us. That's the heartland. Like that's really important for the rest of the United States. And yet you're revealing like, but there's structural inequalities here. So part of the work that we have to do, all of us, and again, Ohio is so important in this entire conversation. Every single person in the entire state is so important, is that we have to be prepared to do this deconstruction. And it's scary. But this is a moment where we are allowing ourselves to do it. It's uncomfortable. This is, I think, what I would ask if there's something to learn from the book. And thank you again, Sarah, for kind of pointing out that I'm trying to do this with heart. And so I would ask, like, that's how we kind of have to try to move in the world, with a sense of heart. I guess the difficult part, and this goes back maybe to one of your other questions, which is the notion of objectivity. You know, and how, are they missing the story completely? Do they just not care? Are we completely invisible? I think, you know, now we have this understanding of like, oh, you know, people think that Black people have a greater resistance to pain. We just think, oh, we look at Black people and we think that their girls are actually older. That is all part of this media narrative. And in the worst sense, it's the dehumanization. That's why the story about the forced hysterectomies being revealed by a whistleblower in Georgia in a private detention facility where we as journalists cannot go because it's a private company. They don't have to open their doors. And so, you know, why isn't that story, you know, full block letters above the fold on the New York Times?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're probably thinking, oh, well, you know, those women did something wrong. Oh, those women, well, they're illegal, aren't they? I'm sure that in a newsroom, the response was, well, but aren't they illegal anyway? What aren't they? Why are they here anyway? And so that goes to this notion that all of us, again, have the responsibility to deconstruct, which is, what is this concept of an illegal human being? And that's how we got to this place. And that's why we have to, all of us, as we're deconstructing and understanding this moment for, you know, loving Black lives and respecting Black lives, it's kind of like the deconstructing of this anti-immigrant narrative that has been present and throughout, like a virus in our country that has been present, that we have to name.
You know, when folks read your book, Once I Was You, I think they will get some direction toward the answer to this question, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about what, in your estimation, you discuss in the book your lived experience of coming here as an immigrant child in the 1960s. Your dad got a job at the University of Chicago, and you write very poetically about your mother's connection to her home country and this sort of liminal state or dual consciousness that you're experiencing your whole life. Meanwhile, there is this undercurrent of the toxicity and the hate that you were just discussing. You mentioned a moment ago how that intertwines with or sort of builds on anti-Blackness in this country's history. But regarding immigration specifically, what do you think is the inherent sort of foundational problem about this country, the one with the Statue of Liberty, supposedly proclaiming its welcome to the tired and weak and poor 5 miles from you? What is it about this country's culture and foundations that make it a dangerous place for a woman with a uterus to try to cross a border?
All right, so this is where it gets kind of complicated, because so I'm going to throw a lot of things at you, and I really, not at you, but at the audience, right? Because we have to kind of, again, deconstruct. So, again, we were taught that the Pilgrims arrived to Jamestown, Plymouth Rock. Actually, no. The first arrival was in St. Augustine in Florida. the second settlement of people living on what is now U.S. land was Santa Fe in New Mexico. So Spanish was the first language that was spoken on this land. If we were being taught that in our history books, just imagine, Sarah, if we were being taught in our history books, like, oh my gosh, what ends up happening is that Spanish is being spoken. Then the Pilgrims arrive, then they kind of arrive, and there's genocide, and there's there's enslavement, and they're taking people, children away from their parents, and so if we begin to deconstruct all of that, then you understand that there's a larger story here. It is, for me, one of the revealing moments in the writing of this book was finding my own connection to a group of people that I didn't necessarily see a connection. Who were the first people excluded from this country by law? So I'm not talking about deported, and I'm not talking about enslaved in the country. I'm talking about by law, who were the first people to be excluded, not allowed to come? It was Asian women. It was Chinese women. This was the precursor to the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so what is the core of that? It's white supremacy. Again, why don't we learn about Spanish being spoken? Because they weren't writing the history books, right? So how does that lead to then being a refugee woman? I mean, the thought of this happening just, it makes me want to cry, because I know so many of these women, they are refugees. They are escaping terror. They are being terrorized. And then they're being put into a prison where they're being raped over and over and over again. I had a horrific thought, Sarah, and I'm going to reveal it because I'm very honest again. And so I thought today, I was like, oh, the reason why they're performing these hysterectomies is because then they'll know that they can rape those women because they can never get pregnant. Yes, I just said that. Because the raping of women and children and teenage girls and babies, because all of those are being held right now as we speak in the state of Ohio, in New York, in Texas, that raping of people going hungry in these detention facilities, not having enough food, being served oatmeal with maggots and being forced to eat that has been happening for over a decade in this country. Started around 2002, really massively after 9/11. And we have been saying, look what's happening. Look what's happening. They're committing suicide by swallowing their socks when they're on suicide watch. Look at what's happening. The women are getting raped, sexually assaulted by men and women. And these places are being audited and they're being given seals of approval. So, no, I'm not surprised. This is the natural. Anybody who is, I'm sorry, a pedophile, a rapist, an abuser of children and women knows where to go get a job and where they can get a job. It's in an immigration detention facility, any of them. Basically, all you need is a high school education. And they've said there's just such an influx. They're lowering their standards. Do criminal checks actually need to be taken? So let us be clear about what is happening. There will be a reckoning. I hope I'm alive to see it. And the books will be written as to how did this happen? And I know for sure that I didn't want to be on the side of like, oh, well, I was just kind of sitting around. No.
I just got one question for you following that very powerful testimony before we turn it over to questions from folks joining us this evening, and that is, you're a storyteller and a reporter and a truth teller. These are the gifts that you bring forth in order to be of service to our progress in society, building toward a better place where such horrors don't happen. For folks joining us tonight, how would you, most of whom probably are not in your industry, and they're going to read your book, Once I Was You, and they're going to learn about you personally, but also this history, this country, these problems that your story helps illuminate. What can they do? What can they do when they're feeling in their hearts right now what you were just conveying, and they don't want to be on the side of silence and inaction?
So, so first of all, I love, Sarah, that you just said you're going to read her book, which is really important, because actually as a Latina author, there is like a lot of pressure to perform. So yes, please read the book, i.e. purchase it, and let publishers know that you're interested in this work. And I hope you feel touched. It's a book that there's a lot of joy in it. Sarah and I are, we're very serious people. I think if Sarah and I were hanging out and drinking a beer, although I get drunk really quick, but we'd be laughing and talking about all kinds of silly things. But we also understand the severity of the moment that we're living in. So we're talking about these serious things. But I also want to tell you, like, there's a lot of joy in the book too. There's a lot of finding and fighting through, and really in many ways choosing love. Kind of working to deconstruct the ego, and because there's the story of me being a survivor of rape, which is not necessarily what you expect in a so-called immigrant book, but that I'm an American woman. This happened, and so I hope it touches you in many ways, but specifically in the issue of immigration. So one, don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are many organizations throughout the state of Ohio. Again, I keep on talking about the state. There are many organizations that are already doing this frontline work. So do a little bit of research, and you'll find the organizations that are long-term, been doing this work, whether they're nonprofits or, grassroots organizations or church-based, that are actually doing some of the frontal work, because there are frontal needs right now. Like, people are hungry, they need clothing, they need, all of that basic stuff, because again, Latinos and Latinas have been the essential workers keeping this country kind of going, but also suffering a lot of high unemployment. So there's that. In terms of the immigration story, there are many organizations. Listen to Latino USA and our reporting, and find the organizations, because there are those that are doing the frontline work, either down on the border. There are people who I've met who have been completely inspired to action and have done, basic, just human to human work of, when these children were being separated. Many of them arrived in the state of Ohio. Could you volunteer to be one of those people that helps get them? These people are arriving, they're released from a detention facility on the border, if they're lucky enough to be released and allowed in the country. I mean, everything is now stopped, but then they're put on a bus in the bus station in McAllen and sent to Cleveland, and it's like, good luck to you. And they get out of the bus in Cleveland, and they don't have a jacket, these basic things. So there are many grassroots organizations that have been doing this kind of frontline work for a long time. Connect to them. Donate to either to journalists like Futuro Media, that is doing the reporting, which is such an important part of the story. We're a nonprofit, but donate, and it doesn't take a lot. Like, even $5 means something. Don't throw anything away. Books, clothing, that stuff that you have in your cellar, please find places to take it, because so many people would be so appreciative. And then talk. I think talk with each other. I have so many stories of my encounters with people in Ohio, all across the state, because that's what I do. I'm talking to all of the people back then, back when I was on a plane, a train, an automobile, cars, I was talking to everybody. And I was having just conversations with people who were Trump supporters, and people who were not. And we need to learn how to show our heart a little bit more. And ultimately, I guess, this is kind of personal. I just don't know how people can live with like a tremendous amount of hate with them all the time. And so, trying to find those people who are struggling with this election. I mean, this is one of the things that I actually said to several people who I encountered in Ohio. I just said, okay, I'm going to make a joke. I have to make a joke. So I'm 5 things that this president doesn't like. So I'm Mexican, I'm an immigrant, I'm a journalist, I'm a woman, and I'm flat-chested. I can laugh. I made the joke. I can laugh. It's okay. I know you guys are all like, oh my God. So I said to these people, I would say, I want you to look at me. I'm Mexican born. I'm an immigrant. For decades, I had a green card. I'm the person that this president could want deported. And they would say, no. And I'd say, yes. So think of me. Don't forget me. Look at me. And I did this because I approach people again, looking straight at them. So I would just say, think of the ones around you who may be feeling invisible, and make them feel visible. You have that privilege. And also, just to end, Sarah, always when I would be going out to all the speeches, because I, like you, am on the road all the time, and people would always say, what can we do? And I often would say, also, you probably know what to do. Probably you already know. So sit with it and just be like, oh my God, I really always did want to go and volunteer with blah, blah, blah. Or, oh my God, I really always did want to write that check. Or, oh my God, I really always did want to go. And so maybe you actually do know what you want to do. And I trust that you'll do it. Thank you for that question, Sarah.
Thank you, Maria, for all your wisdom. I'm just going to say once again, buy her book, Once I Was You. It's an incredible piece of writing. And, I focused sort of on immigration issues tonight because of the terrible news in our news cycle. But Maria bears witness to a very full, whole picture of a human's life. And you'll learn a lot, not just about the world, but about what it means like to be, as we were discussing earlier, a person who leads with heart. I know that there are questions coming in from people who are joining us, and I think maybe, Gwen, are you going to field those?
I am. One of those questions is from Ms. Lopez, and she would like to know if Maria would consider running for office.
No. My husband is so funny. My husband, because we live in Harlem and Manhattan, and we'd be walking around and I'd be like, oh my God, they need to put a stop sign here, or what's the matter with with the subway stop, and he'd be like, Maria, you need to run for mayor. And it's just like, no, it's not that if I was younger that I wouldn't have told my younger self, no, do this. But the truth is that right now at this point in my life, no, I'm much more effective in this place. But thank you for asking. It's a fun consideration, but no.
Rachel would like to know how you decided what facts about immigration you chose to include as you told your own personal story.
This is where I was like, Sarah Smarsh, why did you do this? Why were you the first one to kind of do this thing where, oh my God, I've got to incorporate history into, oh my gosh. I suffered through this a lot. As we built that outline, we just kind of, we really wanted to tell this story of immigration policy from when it begins, right? And that's why that story of the exclusion of Chinese women became so central, right? Because the narrative that we're told is that these women were sex workers, that they were prostitutes. That's what we're told in the history books. You know that because you read that. It's like they were not. They were my mother. These women were like my mother trying to be reunited with her husband. So I got to be honest with you. I feel like there was a lot of the history that I didn't include. Sarah's going to, I don't know what your reaction is going to be, but I wrote an extra 100,000 words. they had to cut 100,000 words from my book. So imagine, there was a lot of history that came out. There was a whole sections of my life that were like whoop, pulled out. You know, my editor, she said she was doing surgery to bring down that 100,000 words. So the picking and choosing of the immigration history, it was the parts that felt most kind of salient, and the parts that really could make connect with something that's happening today, which is why, for example, the story of Vietnamese refugees is so central in kind of my experience. But I feel like there was a lot that wasn't included, so that's probably a weak spot for me right now. I'm going to be thinking, oh my God, I didn't include this, I didn't include that. So
Mary says that Europe is also struggling with the rejection of immigrants. Do you think that there are things that we can learn from Europe and how they're handling the situation, or do you think they're handling it worse than we are?
well, you know what it points to is that this is a worldwide phenomenon. Do we really have a worldwide national conversation about migration? No. I don't want to get the countries wrong. I'm not sure, because I'm trying to think, but it was a country that recently rejected a group of people, and they were sent back on a boat, and they capsized and they died. It was, I think, like 20 people. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my God, this is happening in Europe. How is this happening? And so, you know, there are some places, you know, I was in Germany at some point in the last 4 or 5 years doing some reporting, and they were trying to do the refugee processing right and sensitively. And of course, they're still dealing openly with their own history, and I think they're doing that better than most places. But I think until we have actually an international conversation, you know, who would have been leading that conversation? You would think it's the United States. This country is not leading that conversation. And so if the United States is a global leader, if you're going to take that as perspective, the fish stinks from the head down. And right now, the United States on its policies of immigration and refugees stinks. And so everybody else is just like, psht. And I don't think that you could say that there's any country that's actually doing it the way it should be done. Even Canada, that we have great expectations for, is not doing it right. And by the way, here's the whole thing is that, you know, people think that refugees are just like self-interested, you know, just want to make a buck. No, but these are people who have, they have ganas, they have chutzpah, they have the wherewithal in the middle of like tragedy to say, I'm going to get up and go. That takes a lot. And I think we should respect that and want that in our countries.
Someone wants you to comment on COVID and the immigrants and how it's so rampant with the immigrant populations.
So I'm a survivor of COVID myself. I didn't want to believe it. I think I understand people in really wanting to deny this thing. I didn't want to believe that I had gotten sick, and then I got sick, and then I didn't even get tested because I didn't have those kind of symptoms, just a fever and body aches that lasted for about 30 days and left me immobilized. And then I had the antibody test. So for me, I think it is very personal. I have lost many people. My husband, the artist, Germán Pérez, follow him on Instagram, German Pérez. He's amazing. He's lost so many friends to COVID in the Dominican Republic. And so this is very personal. I think one of the things that we have realized, so again, Latinos and Latinas, it's like invisible, visible, invisible, visible. I mean, please, the state of Ohio, Latinos and Latinas have been there for decades, dare say over a century, and they are farm workers in your state. They were working in those farms throughout the pandemic, are working today. We know those farm workers were working in New York State, they were working in California, they were working in Texas, and here in New York, at the height of New York being the epicenter of the pandemic, the electric bikes, you could hear the buzzing of the electric bikes of the Latino delivery men delivering food to all of the New Yorkers who were not leaving their homes. And that food was being cooked by immigrants who are mostly Latinos and Latinas. So we kind of understood, like, wow, these people are really essential. These grocery workers, wow, they're like really, and yet, meatpacking plants were declared essential workers. And so they stayed open, and the virus went rampant. I was in Mississippi at the beginning of the pandemic. The pandemic has reached Mississippi, and those poultry processing plants, are they being taken care of? So this has been very, very difficult personally, and I'll just say, I became so obsessed with trying to see who the Latinos and Latinas were that at the height of the epidemic, I got an interview with a doctor at a hospital here in New York City, Bellevue. And I said, who are the people who are struggling for their breaths right now in the intensive care unit? And she said, well, it's that guy who was delivering the pizza 3 days ago. It's that construction worker who you walked by and was healthy 3 days ago. It's the guy working in the deli. It's, Senor Fernandez, Martinez, and Perez. And they were fine 3 days ago, and now they're intubated on a respirator, fighting for their breath here in the intensive care unit. So, okay, finally, I'm kind of silly. So when we did go out to go shopping, my adult children would be with me, all wearing masks, and I would walk by the deli workers, all the Mexicanos here on Broadway in Manhattan, and I'd just be like, gracias, paisano, gracias, paisano, gracias, paisana, gracias por su trabajo. And like, yeah, I was saying thank you to the firefighters after 9/11. Say thank you to those essential workers, those Latinos and Latinas in your own community. Say thank you. Gracias.
And finally, how is it that you hope the immigration policy will change under a Biden-Harris campaign?
Well, I'm hoping to get the interview with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I've been asking for a year, and I'm getting a little bit antsy about it. Given how Sarah has brilliantly decided to focus on this issue of immigration, on the women who were forcibly sterilized in these moments, in these detention facilities, I think that this is the perfect opening for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to say these places all need to be shut down. They all need to be shut down. This horror has to stop. Will he do that? This is the question that I have. And by the way, I asked this to the socialist, Bernie Sanders, when he was running. I said, will you halt all deportations? And he said, no, not all of them. And I was like, what do you mean? You're the socialist. You're the radical. Like, what do you mean? And then a week later, after I pressed him on this, he said that he would halt all deportations. So whatever is going to happen, first of all, there is no security that Joe Biden is going to win this election. Let me just say, your state, every single one of you who is watching this, you're going to determine who wins or loses. Not me, you. I mean, it's Florida and you. So I'm watching Florida and Ohio like a hawk. That's why I'm so happy to be doing this event, my book launch in Ohio. So you're going to decide. So, and if Joe Biden wins, then it doesn't stop. The pressure on him does not stop, because I think that's what we hopefully have learned, which is in this country, there's so much beauty here, but you can't stop pushing. I'm looking right now at the book, She Came to Slay, The Life and Times of Harriet Tubman. It's on my desk. I'm not going to reach out and get it. But Harriet had those liberation dreams. She had that capacity, to imagine. So we all have to have that capacity to imagine what's possible, that immigration facilities are shut down entirely, that deportations are halted, that families are immediately reunified, that mental health services are provided for free for all of those people. That's what's just. That's what's just in our moment. But again, Biden is not going to win unless you make him win, Ohio. So if you're feeling a little bit like the pressure is on your shoulders, that's the idea. The pressure is on your shoulders. So let's see how you do, Ohio. And thank you so much to the Hudson Library, to Sarah Smarsh. I dream of being with you in person one day. Okay, honestly, I dream of being with you and Dolly Parton and me together in person. A girl can dream. You never know. You never know.
That's right.
You never know. But thank you so much for this beautiful event. Honestly, I'm so thrilled. And from a Midwestern girl to all of you, thank you so much.
Thank you both. We are deeply appreciative of you and Sarah speaking to us this evening, and I would strongly recommend you all run out and grab their books and read them. They're so worthwhile, and they're very important to be reading and thinking about now. So thank you all for coming. We hope you'll tune in for future programs, and thanks from the Hudson Library. Have a good evening.